Oh, God, that's bright. Perfect. Hi, how are you? Yeah, cool. Yay. I'm going to preface this with the fact that I'm very tired. It took me 12 hours to get here because I forgot my passport, couldn't make my flight, had to take a train, that got delayed. So I'm cold and I'm tired, so let's see how this live coding goes. We're here today to talk about micro-interactions with React Spring. So how many of you use Vue? Show of hands. How many use React? Don't tell them if I mess up, please. So, okay, cool. It's kind of off. No, it's not off the screen. We're good. Okay. So, hey, my name is Emma. He basically read you everything on this slide. I'm not going to reiterate it. We're here to talk about micro-interactions. And animations is something I had always been very interested in. And this quote might sound like something you've thought to yourself. I really wish I knew how to add animations to my application. CSS animations don't feel very robust. They can be a little bit hard to work with, and some of these JavaScript libraries can be a little intimidating. And this is kind of how I thought. And then I found React Spring. So I'm really excited to share that with you today. So micro-interactions are small animations that can take your application from ordinary to exceptional. So if we think of HTML as the body of a person, and CSS as the visual appearance of a person, then animations are really the body language or the personality of a person. So here are just a few reasons why you should use animations throughout your application. So there are two kinds of time. There's clock time and there's brain time. So the first is just the objective measure of time, and the second is how a person perceives time. So we can actually use animations to alter our users' sense of time. And this is really good if you need to work on your performance budget. Animations can illustrate a state change. So if a user is filling out a form and they incorrectly enter their password, we can use micro-interactions to kind of let them know, hey, there's something you need to fix. There's nothing on this slide, is there? We're just going to roll with it. They draw attention to something, ironically. So we can use micro-interactions to capture users' attention and tell them that, hey, there's something wrong. Yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. They inform users about the status of a task. So if a user's request is processing or if their data is loading, we can use micro-interactions to inform them of its status. So this is, custom progress bars are a really great way to do this. And actually, it's going to elongate the amount of time your users are willing to wait for a process to finish if you've got an animation. Social media applications are really good at getting their users to form habits, and they do so with these little micro-interactions. So Facebook's like button is a prime example of this, like Instagram's heart animation, and they delight users and they keep them coming back for more. And speaking of delighting users, we can use micro-interactions to enhance a user's experience. So it can take something like filling out a form and bring it to life. And we can use micro-interactions for many things. They let us do a lot of really amazing things, but how do we actually build them? They're comprised of three main areas. So the first is an interaction. All animations require something to trigger them, or micro-interactions require something to trigger them. And this can be user-triggered, like clicking a button, or it can be process-driven, like requesting data. And once we know what triggers this micro-interaction, we have to define the different states that this interaction has. So if it's a sidebar, is it visible or is it not visible? And once we've defined these various states, what's expected at each step? What does the animation look like for each of those? And when we're creating these micro-interactions, there are a few things to keep in mind. We just heard about accessibility. People aren't going to care about your animations if they're not accessible. So if you're animating something like a progress bar that has really important information and you're not using the proper markup, it's going to be useless to a lot of people. Relatability. Our goal is to create animations that are natural and fluid, not robotic and linear. Try to mimic the physics of the real world when designing and developing your micro-interactions. Animations draw your user's attention, but not all information has the same level of importance. So you first have to understand which piece of your site or your UI has the most time-sensitive or the highest priority information, and then decide what to animate from there. And please don't make your users wait for your really cool animation that you thought you needed to add, because if their page is loaded, like, they're going to be a little pissed off if you have to sit and wait for 5 seconds. So now we actually, we have the basis. We understand at a high level how to build these things. How do we actually physically build them? And this is where React Spring comes in. So in the past, we've used CSS animation libraries with transition timing functions and Bezier curves to animate elements in the UI. But it's really, really difficult to make these elements transition naturally. Elements in life don't transition linearly through different states, and your UI shouldn't either. So React Spring is really special. It's physics-based, which means it doesn't use transition timing curves or Bezier functions. And it also works really, really well with React hooks. So let's see what we can create with it. React Spring has several different hooks. We're only going to touch on 3 today. So use Spring can be used to animate CSS values, and it integrates really well with state, which we'll see. Use chain allows you to kind of chain different animations in a certain order, and we'll see that in our second example. And use transition is really cool. One example of using this to mount and unmount elements would be if you have a photo gallery that you're swiping through. You don't want to have 1,000 photos loaded in your DOM, so this will actually mount and unmount elements. So I'm going to try to build a progress bar. Let's see how this goes. This is what it looks like. We're going to simulate data loading. We're going to have buttons. It'll pretend like it's loading data, etc. So let's see how this goes. Is this too dark? Yes? Use the light theme. I can do that. Oh God, well now, preferences? Color, how about I search for color? Set accent. How do I get to my color scheme? 4th. Oh, reading would be nice. Light. Ah, purple's prettier. Okay. So what I've done, there's a CLI tool called Create React App. It lets you just run, npx create React App. It spins up this local application. So that's all I've done, and I've just added React Spring as a dependency to my package.json. So if we take a look at index.js here, all it's doing, we've got 2 different components. The first we're going to build is a progress bar. It is simply just rendering this progress bar. There's nothing crazy here. I also have some CSS already in here because this is not a CSS talk, so I'm not going to teach you how to style things. And this is where we're at. So what's going on here? So all we have is just some imports. We've got our progress bar. It just returns some JSX or some markup. Looks very similar to HTML. And it, again, just has 5 buttons and then our meter. Now, I want to say this is not accessible. Please don't at me. This is not accessible. Please don't use this in production. This is simply just to kind of illustrate how you can create something like this. OK, so the first thing we need is some state. So how much progress does our progress bar actually have? We're going to use React hooks, progress, and set progress. Use state. And we'll just default to 0%. So use state, when we call it, it returns an array with 2 objects. We're just destructuring it out. The first is going to be the state variable, and the second is going to be the updater function. And this is the default value here. So we've got our default state. And now let's actually make our animation. So this is where we call use Spring. It's going to take an object, and we just tell it what properties we want to animate. For this, it's very simple. We just want the width of our progress bar, and we just want to set it equal to whatever progress is at that point in time. Next, we've got some buttons. Let's make them do things. So on click, and we do set progress to whatever percentage it is. Also, I'm using a German keyboard with a US layout, so if I make dumb typing mistakes, just be patient, please, like that. Okay, so now we've got our buttons. If you click them, it should update, except nothing's happening yet. And that's because we haven't actually told React Spring what to animate or what values to give it. So any element you want to animate has to be prefaced with this animated value here. So we're telling React Spring, hey, this span's going to be animated. And what are we animating? that gets passed into this style attribute. So we're animating using this animation that we just declared above. Okay, so now when we click, it doesn't work. I knew this was going to happen. Hold on one second. So with should be progress, and we click, and it doesn't work, and I don't know why. What? You get a prize. I have stickers. I do, though. If you want some, come see me. Oh my God, thank you. Yay, yeah, I did it. Just another, this is totally me going off the cuff right now. React Spring has a configuration that you can use. So let's say, like, oh, this is a little too fast of an animation. You can just press config here, and I'm going to say, like, config.molasses. It comes with a bunch of values you can play with, and they affect, like, the mass and tension of your objects. And you can say, like, that's really freaking slow. So, yeah, you've got a lot of configuration that you can play with here. Cool, so since that one only failed like a small amount, let's move on to a harder one. We're going to animate a menu, and we're going to use all three of these hooks, hopefully. So I know it's cut off a little bit. There's a button up at the top right. It says menu, and when you click menu, the whole thing slides down, and then your items are going to successively animate in. I'll play that again. When the menu is open, that button text changes to close, and when you close, the items will animate out first, followed by the whole menu. So let's try this. The first thing, I'm just going to render the menu component so we can see that. So we don't need progress. Let's animate menu now. So what's going on here? We've got two components in here. The first is going to be menu wrapper, and this is where our state is going to be contained, and it's going to be passed down to our child menu component here. And this also has the button. Yeah, you can see the button. So our state will be in menu wrapper, and here's our menu. We've got an array with 4 menu items, and it's just returning some markup. And we're just mapping over our items and creating list items for each of those. We are exporting our menu wrapper as default, which is why you'll see, like, I'm just importing it as menu. It is the default export, so don't worry about that. Okay, so let's create some state. So we need to know if our menu is open or closed. So we'll call this menu visible, set menu visible. And this will be use state, and we'll just initialize it to false. So our menu is going to be closed by default. When we click our button, we want it to toggle on, let's not mess this up, on click. And we're going to do set menu visible. And we're just going to toggle the state. So whatever menu visible is, let's just make it the opposite. Visible, that's a hard word to spell when talking, visible. Okay, so now this should actually toggle the state. And just to make sure, let's update this label. So with JSX, you can use expressions. So anything inside these curly brackets here is going to be evaluated. So we can do menu visible. Let's use a ternary. Menu visible. If menu is visible, we want the user to close it. So we'll say close. And otherwise, we'll say menu. Seems pretty fine. So we can see, yeah, our state is definitely updating now. But our actual menu needs this value. So let's pass that piece of state down. So we'll do menu visible equals menu visible. So our component is now receiving that piece of state. Let's actually destructure it out of props. And let's actually do something with it. Let me check my notes so I totally don't royally screw this up. Okay, let's create our animations. The first animation we will create is the menu bar sliding down. We're going to use Spring for this, just like we did in the last. So const menu bar animation. Use Spring. So these capitals are going to be the death of me. Okay. Use Spring can take several values. Basically, you can define the from value of all the CSS properties you want to animate, and then the to value. You don't actually need this, so anything that's on the same level as this, like color, this will just be recognized as the to value. And you don't even need the from value. You can actually just set those properties in the CSS and just tell it what you want it to go to. We are going to keep the from value. So where do we want this to come from? We want to start off the screen, and we want it to be not opaque, transparent. So we'll set opacity to 0. And then we could animate height, but that's not very performant. It's actually going to cause layout issues. It's very non-performant to animate height and width. So we're going to keep our menu the same width and height of the viewport, and we're just simply going to transition it the whole thing in. So this is going to be transform translate y, so we just want to slide this in from the top, but it is going to start negative 100% off the screen. And what's that going to transition to? Opacity. We want it to be opaque, but our menu is going to be toggling. This isn't a one-time thing, so how do we know what value this should have? It kind of depends on the state here. So if menu is visible, we want it to be visible. And if it's not, we don't want it to be visible. And then same with transform. So if menu is visible, we want to actually put this into its normal flow in the document. So translate y 0, otherwise translate y of negative 100%. Cool. So how do we actually get this to work? Again, we need to tell React Spring what thing is going to be animated. So I am going to take this div, and I'm going to make it an animated div. All right, and then lastly, we just got to pass style equals menu bar animation. Okay, and it does slide in. That's where you clap. I didn't mess that up. Now let's actually get those menu items transitioning in. So menu items animation. This one's going to be a little trickier. It's going to be using use transition. This is not the only way to do this one. You could also use Spring, totally fine. I just wanted to kind of demonstrate like the different ways that you can do this. So the first thing that this is going to take is the items. So if our menu is visible, because with use transition we can pick and choose which elements we want to render, or we can conditionally render something to be visible or not visible, and that's what we're going to do. If our menu is visible, we want to render our menu items. But if it's not visible, we just want to render an empty array, like there's nothing to render. And because we're just conditionally rendering something, we don't have like a list of items that we want to show. We don't need to have a key there. And then lastly, we just have to tell it 3 values. So we need to define the from, the enter, and then leave. Okay, so where are we coming from, what happens when it enters, and what happens when it leaves. So from and leave are going to be the same, so I'm just going to type them out. Opacity, again, 0, they're going to be transparent. And these are going to just slide in a little bit. They're going to slide in from the top about 20%. So we'll do transform, and we do translate y, negative 20%. Okay, and then this is basically going to be the same. So to avoid terrible writing and mistakes, I'm just going to copy that. So again, here this is going to go back to 0. So opacity is going to be 1. It's going to translate to 0. And we can't just pass this as a prop. We actually have to replace this. We've got to like map over these. So do menu items animation dot map. And we're just going to destructure out the item and its props. It has to be called props. I don't know why. I think that's dumb, but it's fine. Naming is hard. We just want to render a list item, and these are going to be animated list items, so they have to be animated.li. We're going to render the item. And then just pass it a couple of things. So we'll give it a class name. In React, it's called class name, menu list item. We're going to give it a key because we are iterating over them. It's going to be item, and I will fix that in just a second. They will be unique. And then pass it as style, and this is going to be props. Not pay. What is payment response? Menu item animation. That's hold on. Payment. Okay. The one thing we need, a couple of things we need to add real quick. We need to tell React Spring that these are unique items, so we can actually use them as keys. I don't know what this autocorrect is doing. True. Okay. And then the last thing we have to add is a trail. This is basically how much of a delay do you want each to have. We're just going to say 500 divided by menu items.length. Menu items.length. Okay? So that should work now, hopefully. Yeah, and you can see them transitioning in. Thank you. We're almost done. You can see that they're transitioning in. Like, you almost can't even see the menu items transition because they're starting at the same time. And this is where use chain is going to come in. So the first thing we need to do is create some refs. So we'll call this menu bar ref equals use ref. And we'll pass it here, menu bar ref. We're going to do the same. Yeah, OK. Sorry, we're going to do the same here. Const menu item ref. Use ref, pass it here, ref, menu bar, menu items, ref. Okay, so we've got our references now. We just got to define use chain. What did I mess up? Why are you yelling at me? S, where? 18. Ah! Thank you. Almost done. Okay, we have our use chain. The first thing we have to do is tell it what order that we want these animations to happen. So the first thing we want to do is if menu is going to be visible, we want first the menu to transition. So menu ref, menu bar ref, I guess is what I called it, not sticking to my notes. And the second is going to be menu item. Items ref? Was it items? Is that what I messed up that? Menu item ref. I'm going to add an S. This just doesn't seem right. I'm going to keep messing it up. Menu items ref. Okay? If the menu is transitioning out, we're going to flip these. So it's going to be menu items ref followed by menu bar ref. The last thing we're going to add, again, we're just going to tell, do we want this animation to have a delay? The first transition, we do not want any delay on that. Start immediately. And then the second one, if the menu is sliding into visibility, we'll give it 0.3 seconds of a delay, and we want the menu to wait half a second before transitioning out. And that should be it. This is the moment of truth. Yeah, it worked. Cool. And I know I'm over my time, so with that, I just want to say thank you. All of this content is on Stack Overflow as a 3-part blog series, but I will also be making this GitHub public after this talk. And just a quick thank you to all of my Dribble creators whose like little animations that I featured. So thank you.